Kamal deactivated the buffer field, and the jungle sounds flooded the dome. It was as if the interior immediately became more cramped. The clatter of large raindrops on the shell, the rustling of leaves, the whistling and shrieking of tree dwellers, the shrill cries of funny little six-legged amphibians, which of course were immediately dubbed frogs. A symphony of pure, almost untouched by civilization nature. Unfortunately, it was not to be enjoyed for long. Captain Ochoa had already ordered the base to shut down, and most research parties had returned to the ship. Kamal had barely managed to get permission to stay 2 more days to attend the Unity ritual. "Strictly speaking, this is outside the scope of our mission," Ochoa said when Kamal made his request. "The final report is almost ready, and it basically says that the planet is of no interest to us. It's poor in minerals, too far from strategically important areas, and the population is too small and primitive to be considered a potential source of labor or a mobilization resource." But the captain stopped Kamal with a gesture of his hand. "However, I will grant your request. Your socio-psychological assessment of the local population is essential to the report. I realize there are other priorities besides military intelligence for a scientist like you. I don't want anyone to make claims against Starfleet Command for damaging the interests of the Imperial Academy of Sciences." He grinned. "Unofficially, Kamal, I just want to help your career. I don't know much about primitive cultures or exoplanetary ethnography, but if you say there's something about these Casalians that makes you want to spend 2 more days on this godforsaken planet, I believe you. I hope you can squeeze a good thesis out of them." "Sir, the myths of the Casalians have a clear paleo-contact theme. This is the first time we've encountered such a thing at such a great distance from the core systems. It suggests that the dispersion may have begun much earlier than previously thought, perhaps even before the rise of the first Terran hegemony. That could overturn a lot of assumptions about history, sir." "That's why I'm giving you an extra 2 days," Ochoa said. "Don't think we're all shallow soldiers who can't see beyond our uniforms. I am well aware of the importance of a full and accurate knowledge of history for Imperial science. The Empire's greatness stems directly from its great past. But only for 2 days, not an hour more. Your station will be evacuated in 48 hours, and we will leave immediately. It's time to go home." Kamal started to thank him, but Ochoa stopped him again. "No need, Kamal. We're all working for one cause. And what cause could be more important than the good of the Empire?" Now, as he gathered his thoughts before the Unity ritual to which he had been personally invited by the chief shaman of the Yellow Water Tribe, Satval, Kamal was coming to realize that his personal motives were probably not as lofty as Captain Ochoa had made them out to be. He didn't care about the Empire's greatness or even the opportunities in the academic world that would open up to him after successfully defending his thesis. Right now, he was more interested in unraveling the mystery of the origin of the local myths. They told of how the sky gods had populated the great world, the planet Casal III, by arriving on great celestial rafts. This was very interesting since, until now, it was assumed that Casal III lay far beyond the borders of the dispersion, the great dispersal of humanity across the local sector of the galaxy, and the Casalians were undoubtedly of the human race. The DNA tests were quite unequivocal. There was a quiet knock at the door. Kamal glanced at the exterior view screen. Modwag, Satwal's nephew, was standing at the door. Despite the rain, he wore only a loincloth and, in addition to it, a sling with a bag of narrow leaves over his shoulder and, in his right hand, the long spear that all men of the tribe carried. Large droplets glistened on his dark skin, his short-cropped hair glistening from the moisture that had soaked it. Modwag waited patiently, almost motionless, only blinking occasionally to keep the water running down his face out of his eyes. Kamal got up from the table, picked up the bag of filming equipment from the bed, threw the hood over his head, and stepped out of the dome. The jumpsuit immediately turned on the static field that repelled water, and a cloud of light water dust surrounded Kamal as big raindrops were dissipated by the field. "The ritual will begin at sunset," Modwag said. The compact language processor translated his jerky clicking speech into standard Terran, broadcasting the translation through the earpiece button in Kamal's left ear. "Satval is waiting." The Kasalian turned and strode off down the narrow path that wound through the scrubby edge of the forest deep into the jungle. Kamal followed him. He was not surprised at Modwag's seeming unfriendliness. Restraint was considered one of the chief virtues of men in the Yellow Water tribe, and Modwag was a man of few words, even by local standards. Modwag walked fast, but not too fast, making sure the clumsy alien didn't fall behind or get lost. Kamal once tried to explain to him that he had a navigator, a special device that memorized the way and would always lead him to the right place, but Modwag shook his head as if he were listening to a child telling him some childish tale. "You have to feel the jungle. You must grow up in it, and only then will you feel at home." That was a truth that all Kasalians absorbed with their mother's milk. Kamal couldn't help but recognize that there was some sense in this approach. As good as navigational equipment was, the most direct route in the jungle was not necessarily the easiest. In some places, the jungle became a completely impassable chaos of old fallen trunks, impenetrable undergrowth, and muddy ravines. Good thing there were no large predators or poisonous animals on Kasal 3, except for brightly colored slugs and snails that could spoil the day of a person who touched them carelessly. Another argument in favor of the Terran origins of the Kasalians, Kamal thought, as he ducked under the lianas that hung low over the trail. Local evolution was clearly not even two-thirds of the way to the emergence of primates or similar potentially sentient species. It was strange, of course, that the Kasalians had been stuck in the Stone Age and had failed to populate any significant areas. There were 4 continents on Kasal 3, but humans only lived in a relatively small area of one of them. Perhaps today, at the Unity ritual, when the most intimate tales of the tribe's history would be told, he would be able to clarify something. A warm yellow light flashed through the dense foliage. A few moments later, Kamal, who had fallen a little behind his guide, emerged from the thicket into a spacious clearing, in the center of which a fire was burning under a tall, large canopy. It sometimes occurred to Kamal that the Herculean efforts of the Kasalians to procure dry fuel in a jungle soaked with moisture might prove to be the decisive factor holding back their progress. The Kasalians used firewood sparingly, although the jungle was not hot during the season of the south winds, and such impressive fires were lit only in honor of important events, such as the Ritual of Unity. Kamal had never been able to get any clear information about the ritual. Satwal and the other elders were very vague about it. Kamal understood only that the ritual referred to the ancient history and lore of the Kasal, and that it somehow united the tribe and brought a special meaning to the lives of each of its members. However, no one had been able or willing to explain to Kamal what that meaning was. All 11 elders of the Yellow Water tribe were sitting cross-legged around the fire. Kamal immediately noticed that one seat was empty and realized it was for him. Because of the constant rains, the Kasalians did not practice body painting, for it would all be quickly washed away anyway. But even with that in mind, Kamal was somewhat disappointed by the utterly ordinary appearance of the elders. Even Satwal, who came up to meet him, had no additional jewelry or trappings except for a carved pearl earring in his left earlobe, his status sign as chief shaman. Apparently, the restraint of manners had played its part here as well. Kamal obediently took Satval's dark hand, followed him to the prepared place, and sank down on the unexpectedly soft bed of dried grass. The fire was almost blinding after the dark path through the jungle, but Kamal suddenly realized that the eyes of all the elders were on him. Strange. Satval hadn't seemed to say it directly, but he'd made it clear that they were gathering on a traditional day, and Kamal was just lucky to be there. But now, Kamal had the impression that the whole thing was thrown just for his sake. Satval gestured for Kamal to keep quiet and not ask any more questions, returned to his place, and sat down. Kamal expected some ritual action to begin, such as trance-inducing chants, perhaps some magical passes from Satval or one of the other shaman elders, or at the very least, someone throwing a pinch of some magic herb into the fire, but nothing happened. Everyone just sat silently to the cheerful crackling of the fire and looked at Kamal. He felt the irritation gradually building up in him. Could this be just some kind of prank? In the entire month he had spent in contact with the tribe, Kamal had not noticed any tendency for twisted humor. The Kasalians behaved and joked like perfectly ordinary people, which they were, even if civilization had degenerated to Stone Age levels. To relax, Kamal watched the sparks flickering in the flames. They reminded him of the billions of stars that made up the galaxy, great sparks scattered across the vast expanse of space. A great bonfire of life twisted into a giant spiral, and in one corner of that spiral was the Earth Empire, rapidly expanding, gathering, and weaving into its body the countless fragments of humanity scattered across space in the distant past. Kamal could no longer see the campfire or the elders, only this starry spiral spinning faster and faster, attracting and beckoning, until, at last, it completely consumed his entire consciousness. So you are convinced we will not find any new data here? Captain Ochoa looked at the scientist carefully. Not so long ago, you were of a different opinion. Kamal shrugged. That's the nature of science. Some hypotheses become obsolete, others replace them, and scientific thought moves forward. The information I received while attending the Cassilian ritual has made me reconsider my views on the history of the planet's settlement. It has? So now you don't think it's the oldest discovered Earth colony? Ochoa smiled. I hope you're not going to say they're not Homo sapiens, because the DNA tests are unequivocal. The Cassalians are human. Kamal smiled too. No, of course, they are human. But the legends I've encountered during the ritual tell in some detail, albeit allegorically, of the arrival of the Cassalians on the planet. Apparently their ark ship fell through a hyperspace fluctuation. They were lucky. The fluctuation did not destroy the ship, but threw it far beyond the capabilities of the hyperdrives of the time. They ended up cut off from the habitable sector of the galaxy. No wonder they were so degraded. It had been almost 1,000 years since the fall of the first hegemony. Ochoa was thoughtfully silent, looking at the bust of the emperor that stood on a pedestal in the corner of the captain's quarters, as was required by statute. This is a good lesson for us, he said at last. Thanks to the greatness and wisdom of the imperial house, we can be sure that the empire will never suffer the fate of the first and second hegemonies, much less those poor colonists. The empire is eternal, echoed Kamal. And timeless, nodded Captain Ochoa. That is why expeditions like ours are so important. Empire is not a political entity. It is the natural way of existence of the Homo sapien species. It's our sacred duty to bring together all the fragments that were once scattered across the galaxy, to reassemble the empire, and Kassal, though not immediately, will also join the great family of humanity. He stood up, signaling the end of the conversation. I await your final report as soon as you have made all final corrections. All hail the Empire. Glory to the Empire, Kamal replied and left the captain's quarters. What a strange concept, Modwag said, scratching his neck. What's the count? Is it a sixth such race already? Seventh, if you count those lunatics in Sector 9 who blew up all their planets, Satval replied. I'm beginning to think more and more that this crop is hopelessly screwed up. They all inevitably hit the same dead end. Do you think it's time to waste all flock and start again? Modwag wrinkled his nose in frustration. I wouldn't want all that work and nothing to show for it. At least we had managed to reprogram the scientist a little. A brilliant specimen, by the way. By the livestock standards, of course. Satval shook his head. A mother-of-pearl earring, the reality controller, glinted brightly in the starlight. I'm afraid they're hopeless. But I'm willing to give this crop another chance. He smiled. No, let's make it 3 more chances. We'll bring the score to even. If 3 more plots are just as bad, then yes, we'll clean up the whole crop and start again. I'll talk to the customers, Modwag said. They won't be delighted, of course, but they have no choice but to listen to us. They've waited a third of a big spiral turn. They'll wait a little longer. This is the first time I've had such problems with an order. Satval shook his head unhappily. I must have missed something in the design specifications. Otherwise, how do you explain that this disease develops independently in all populations? The Empire. What is this nonsense? How could a normal being even believe in such a stupid idea? Modwag shrugged. Fodder crops sometimes have strange abnormalities. Probably the effects of repeated crossbreeding. By the way, I've noticed another funny thing. Have you noticed that each population believes itself to be the original from which all others descended? Maybe that's where this strange idea of gathering the empire comes from. Satval looked at his assistant with interest. Why, it could very well be. We'll have to consider it when planning the next breeding season. As for what to do with this harvest, we'll proceed as planned. We have a decision to make after inspecting the 10th plot. He was quiet for a moment. They're gathering the empire. To think of it.